This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
You know what's wild? After 35 years, Erik and Lyle Menendez, the brothers who became tabloid shorthand for spoiled rich kids who gunned down their own parents, are now eligible for parole. Let that just sink in for a second, just how much society has changed since the early 90s. That is how they were viewed, just like that, back in the 1990s. Spoiled rich kids who gunned down their own parents. There wasn't a lot of talk or understanding of abuse back then, especially with boys. It's like it just doesn't happen. Gee, I wonder why nobody talked about that. Could there have been men in power who didn't want to have that information get out? We've obviously become much wiser in the years since the 1990s. These are two men who've spent more time behind bars than some of their jurors have been alive. And they just had their sentences reduced in a Los Angeles courtroom. No fanfare, no fireworks, just a gavel, a ruling, and suddenly a pair of convicted murderers are one bureaucratic step closer to walking free. Now, on the surface, it sounds like, ooh, this might not be great. 50 years to life? They're already, I believe, in their 50s. But what it means is they are eligible for parole. And that's all that matters in this case. Basically, what happened, the judge today punted it down the road to the parole board. And now the parole board will have the ultimate say in whether Lyle and Erik Menendez, or either or, can walk free. What do you think about this? Tell me in the comments section on YouTube if that's where you're watching us. Or on Twitter, X, if you're watching us there, let me know there as well. And if you're on the podcast platforms, be sure to press subscribe there. And also be sure to check us out on Twitter at Tony B Pod. Or on YouTube, just search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. You can search that on Facebook and Insta and TikTok as well. We have our content there if you want to have your voice in the conversation. I'm telling you, YouTube is a really good conversation, so do check out our YouTube channel. So what happened in that hearing today? The judge resentenced Erik and Lyle Menendez to 50 years to life, officially replacing their official sentence of life without the possibility of parole. That means they are now eligible to appear before a parole board. No guarantee they'll be released, but a major change in their legal standing. It's the kind of ruling that gets buried in legal paperwork, but could redefine the rest of their lives. To be clear, this wasn't some out-of-the-blue mercy move. It followed a recent shift in California law, specifically a 2018 statute that allows individuals who were under 26 at the time of their crime to be considered for resentencing due to their diminished culpability. The idea is that younger offenders might not have the same impulse control or life experience as other adults, and that should be factored into how long they're locked away. Erik was 18, Lyle was 21. They both qualified. But eligibility didn't make this a slam dunk. Prosecutors pushed back hard. They argued that the brothers still haven't fully accepted responsibility. They weren't denying the original crimes. Nobody's pretending this was some whodunit. But the DA's office pointed to what they described as manipulative behavior behind bars. That includes allegedly possessing contraband cell phones, and a recent psychological assessment that tagged them at a moderate risk of future violence. Not exactly, your perfect glowing Yelp review from your correctional facility, but also, one of those restaurants you'd still try out just to see how it is. The defense, on the other hand, came in loaded with the new narrative, one they've been steadily building over the last decade. The story centers on the abuse allegations, particularly against the brothers' father, José Menendez. And if you have followed the same case from the beginning, you know this isn't new territory. The original trials were some of the first to televise intense graphic testimony about family abuse and psychological trauma, back when nobody could handle it. Back then, the idea that victims of childhood sexual abuse could snap and commit violence weren't broadly accepted. Certainly not in front of a jury being spoon fed images of Beverly Hills privilege and designer suits. But this time around, the defense brought fresh firepower. They presented letters allegedly written by Erik back in the early 90s that described the abuse in chilling detail. They weren't just rehashed claims, they were tangible documents that had, for years, been stuck in the margins of the case. Add to that the testimony of a former member of the boy band Menudo, Roy Rosilio, who recently alleged that José Menendez had sexually assaulted him when he was a teenager. That accusation wasn't part of the original trial, but it's now entered the public record and was brought into the resentencing discussion as further evidence of a pattern of abuse. The point? The defense argued that Erik and Lyle weren't just angry kids with too much money and no conscience. They were traumatized victims of long-term sexual, physical, and psychological abuse who finally snapped and then got painted as monsters by a media machine that loved a good killer rich kid headline. Whether you believe that or not, the narrative has undeniably evolved since the 1990s. What stood out in court was the support from extended family. Several relatives showed up to vouch for the brothers, saying they believe the man they've become behind bars are not the same people who committed these murders. They describe Erik and Lyle as educated, remorseful, and rehabilitated. One cousin told the judge that Lyle serves as a mentor for younger inmates, and Erik has been active in therapy programs and educational projects. This wasn't performative stuff for the hearing. It's part of their documented prison history. So let's be real. Whether that's enough to outweigh 2 shotgun blasts to the face of your own father is a question that doesn't get decided with a few certificates. So what does this resentencing actually mean? First, it is important to understand being eligible for parole does not mean walking out of prison tomorrow. The California Board of Parole Hearings still has to evaluate each brother individually, and that matters because it may not be the same thing for each one of them. That means a separate panel will dig into their psychological evaluations, their prison behavior, their rehabilitation efforts, and most importantly, their current risk to society. It's not just about how sorry they are, it's about whether the state believes they're safe to release. And even if the board signs off, Governor Gavin Newsom still gets the final word. He can uphold it or reverse it. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's more like getting handed an application form to leave Monopoly jail. And you still need to roll doubles. There's also another path on the table, clemency. The brothers have a separate clemency hearing set for June 13th, which is not far off. That's a different legal route altogether, where the governor could grant them early release based on evidence of rehabilitation, injustice, or sentencing, or other extraordinary circumstances. Clemency is rare, but it's not unheard of, especially in cases that have evolved dramatically in public perception. The timing of all this is interesting, too. We're in a cultural moment where old convictions are being re-examined with new eyes. Cases involving abuse, racial bias, systematic flaws in sentencing. The Menendez brothers case has been swept up in that wave, particularly through Gen Z's rediscovery of the case on platforms like TikTok, where armchair sleuths and advocacy accounts have been reframing this narrative. Whether that shift in public sentiment is enough to influence legal decisions, well, it clearly already has. Courts aren't supposed to rule based on hashtags, but clearly more and more they are. Still, this hearing marks a major turning point. For decades, Erik and Lyle were locked into a legal stance that said, in no uncertain terms, you will die in prison. Today, that changed. Now they're technically candidates for freedom. And that raises a question, one that's haunted the case from day one. What exactly does justice look like? Because if you believe the original narrative that these were 2 calculating sons who murdered their parents for money, then any sentence reduction probably feels like a miscarriage of justice. But if you believe that they were broken long before the gunshots, that they were products of sustained trauma and fear, then maybe this hearing feels like a long overdue correction. Not forgiveness, not exoneration, just an acknowledgement that people can change and that the system should occasionally be willing to change with them. So where do we go from here? The brothers will likely face parole hearings in the next year or two, or months. We don't really know the answer to that as of this recording. Their clemency petitions will be reviewed. The governor will eventually weigh in. And in the meantime, the Menendez case, a story once defined by luxury and brutality, enters an entirely new chapter. Not as a cold case, not as a media spectacle, but as a test of how justice handles time, trauma, the messy business of redemption. For now, they remain incarcerated, but the door, once bolted shut, is now slightly ajar. Whether they walk through it, that's still up to the state of California. We'll be watching and we'll keep talking, because stories like this don't end in a verdict. They just change the shape. What do you think? Let me know in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter, X, or Facebook, or Instagram, wherever you are watching this. And let us know, should they get out? Is this the right move? Are we on the right path for the Menendez brothers? My personal opinion, which you all know I'm not afraid to share on the program, but I'm always willing to look in both directions, is that yes, these people were products of abuse. They were products of shameless, systematic sexual abuse that dramatically changed the way their brains work. And they saw the only way out of it as killing their parents. Right? Wrong? Well, when you're in that situation, you tell me what you think. Until then, I don't think anybody can fully understand what they were going through, or the disdain or disgust that they may be feeling for their parents. One who was allegedly the abuser, the other, the one supporting it and hiding it and justifying it and ignoring their own son's pleas for help. So maybe the world is better off without Kitty and José Menendez. Should it have ended that way? Probably not. But when you're in that situation and when you have been the victim of abuse for all those years in such heartless, evil ways, you tell me if it wouldn't be easy to take that rifle and pull the trigger. I'm Tony Bruschi. We'll keep following this for you. Tell me what you think in the comment section and be sure to press subscribe. We will talk again real soon.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.